Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to the Belgium or Spa post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? Did you enjoy the overtaking during this race? Did you enjoy the pit strategy of undercutting and overcutting other teams on this track? Did you enjoy the thought of, George Russell actually going to win this race on a one stop that he called after 11 lap first stint? Quite an amazing race, quite an amazing different variety of things going on in this race. It had almost everything except for a safety car. So did you enjoy that because of all of these things, or did you expect there to be some other issue going on in this race? Did you enjoy it even after you found out that George Russell was disqualified from winning this race? Did that make you happy? Did it say, oh, well, that my driver's now up in the front or closer to the front, gaining more points? Did you think that the Max and Lando battles would be stronger than it really was in this race? But in general, I thought it was a fairly good race. I didn't think it was a super race. I'll probably give it an 8, about an 8 out of 10. It had good strategy, good overtaking on the track, and with that little spice with George Russell going on a one stop at the end and seeing if his teammate could even get caught up with him to pass him kind of made it for me. It was a shame that George Russell was actually disqualified, because after that brilliant strategy that he kind of figured out that he could do earlier on and just kind of kept with it without actually losing much ground. I think they said that they might have lost back to 5th at worst. They were looking at on the strategy, so they said they were just going to gamble and go for it. So I think that was really kind of spiced things up, because you had this battling for all the other teams thinking, oh, they're going to pit again, so we're kind of battling between these other players and not having to even consider George. And then George kind of kept out there and snuck into the lead and was able to win the race. So I thought that was really cool. That was really good. I did think some of the overtaking on the tracks was neat. Probably not quite as fabulous as some other tracks, but it was a decent amount of overtakes on the course. And the strategy and the tire strategy kind of played out a little bit as well. So anyway, what was your thoughts? I'm going to go from the person that scored last all the way up to the winning driver, not excluding George Russell, as he didn't win this race, as he was disqualified. But I will give you my thoughts on how they did and what went wrong, if anything, with them in my view. So, without further ado, we will show George Russell, who was disqualified. He ended up winning the race after starting in 6th. As I said, he did an excellent job. He started off on a set of mediums, gained a position on the first lap of the race, was able to switch to hards and take those hards to the very end of the race. He did pass Perez on lap 21 for 4th, and then worked his way up through the pit strategies from everybody else into that first position and did an excellent job. Unfortunately for him, his car was disqualified for being underweight, so that Mercedes group didn't quite configure and play into the role that they needed to have those insurance gaps on the fuel and the oil, or anything, maybe even the tire amounts that would have added to that weight of that car to make it sure it was compliant with the rules. So unfortunately, since even though he actually won the race with strategy, and I would probably give him the driver of the day, even though he wasn't the official driver of the day, he was disqualified due to that Mercedes, and of course drops back down to 20th with no points. So it's a shame for him. It's a shame for Mercedes, as they were getting back and having that 1-2 for them, getting back right before the break, give them that extra oomph. So this kind of puts a downer on them. But overall, I thought George did an excellent job in this race altogether. So kudos to George, even though Mercedes let him down today. Juan Yuzo qualified in 19th, ended up in 19th. I actually have him having a 3-place grid penalty for impeding during qualifying. So he kind of started off near the back of the pack anyway. He ran around for about 7 laps before they decided to retire that car because of a mechanical issue where it was lost power to that unit. So they could not figure out that on the resets on that car to allow Juan Yujo to continue. So he ended up pretty much quitting early in this stint. So not a whole lot to say for him since didn't get to see a lot from him. He tried to put as much as he could out of that car, driving it around probably 2 laps, without hardly any power on that vehicle to see if they could figure out a way to get him going. Nico Hülkenberg qualified in 16th and ended up 18th. Kind of had a poor running today. Basically, he did pass Gasly for on lap 10 for 17th, but kind of fell back into the pack. I think they were looking for a different strategy for most of the other cars around them in the back that didn't quite play out for them in that Haas. I think they needed to have a little bit different strategy in that Haas. So that's my general take. I don't think anything drastic happened to any of those vehicles, but just had a bad take, didn't have the pace in this, probably had more downforce or something to that effect in this car than they should have. But he did start off on mediums, switched to a set of hards on lap 7, and then switched to another set of mediums on lap 21 and tried to go to the end and just kind of ran out of steam, dropping back down to the 18th spot. So not the great day for Nico Hülkenberg in his Haas today. Logan Sargent did a decent job, I think, getting back up to 17th. He didn't have the greatest time today. He did lose 2 spots at the very start of the race and then worked his way back up. He pitted on lap 9 for another set of mediums and then lap 27 for a set of hards that he went to the end with. Other than that, he's kind of stayed out of the trouble, kind of running in the back of the pack where he was getting passed a couple of times here and there, but couldn't really put any pressure on the people around him. So still not a great job, but overall I think for him it's a decent running, getting up a spot, not quite where he needed to be with his teammate being up in 12th overall. And I'm sure that's the stress is kind of getting to him, knowing that he's probably going to be, losing that seat at the end of the season. So we'll see how that goes for him the rest of this half. If that just loosens him up so that he can actually drive, or if that really just kind of hinders him the rest of this season. Yuki Tsunoda qualified in 20th and had multiple power unit replacements, and so that he had that way number of grid penalty, pushed back into the field for having those replacement parts, so that he started pretty much last in this running. So, and due to that, he did a really good job, I think, getting back up to 16th. I know it's not where he wanted to be. I think he wanted to try to at least get up close to the point range, but I think he did a good job there. He did pass Russell earlier on in lap 11 for 12th position. So he did gain a spot at the very beginning of the race, which was good to see, and did a fairly decent job overall just in that backpack, which is really struggling around those cars, not getting the push that he needed with that clean air. Valtteri Bottas qualified in 14th, ended up in 15th. I know he would like to move forward, but I still think in that Stake Sauber F1 car, getting to 15th and 14th, and of course the qualifying was really good for them in this running, as they were having some really trouble times in that Stake F1 vehicle. I know there's some turnover over there, so hopefully that will get them what they need in this second half of the season to give them some stability and maybe some improvements in that Stake F1 where they can potentially start getting more competitive to that back of that pack. But qualifying in 14th and ended up in 15th overall with that outdated car, I think is really good for Valtteri. And I know he's looking for a seat, so I think he's trying to push as much as he can in that. He did pass Hulkenberg on lap 19 for 14th spot. He did start on a set of mediums, went to lap 12 before switching to a set of hards, and then switching back to a set of mediums on 36. So a decent run for Valtteri Bottas. Not a whole lot of action for him, but being in the back of the pack, trying to do as much as he could with that stake F1 car was about as much as he could do, I think, in regards. Kevin Magnussen qualified in 17th, so I know they had a bad qualifying session, kind of running out at the wrong time when the changing conditions, so didn't quite make it into that second qualifying session. Starting off down the pack in 17th position, he made it up to 14th. Still not quite where they wanted. I think, as I said, they were trying to judge more about the cars around them in their strategies, and kind of misjudge some of those cars and their strategies to play the most out of it. But he did a decent job, I think, overall of driving in that car and where it was, because it didn't look like that Haas had the speed today, which is generally kind of surprising because they're usually pretty good on those high-speed runs in the past. But for some reason today, they were kind of lagging behind. He did pass Sargent on lap 22 for 15th and passed Gasly on lap 37 for 14th. He did set a decent run in that Haas, in my opinion, but just not where Haas wants to be, trying to get those points. And they need to really work on that because they're starting to get some pressure from behind in the constructors' standings as well, instead of moving forward. So they'll have to watch out for the second half of the season to see if they can continue that momentum that they had early on. Pierre Gasly qualified in 12th and went to 13th. I know he had a pretty bad day today. He did pass Hulkenberg on lap 17 for 13th and passed K-Mag on lap 41 for 14th. He did pit fairly early on lap 10, switching from those mediums to a set of hards, and then kind of went to another set later on in the session, but couldn't really gain the ground that he was looking for in this run. So I think he was struggling a little bit more in that Alpine, especially considering his teammate made it up to 8th. So there was something kind of not quite perfected in that Alpine for him in this run in this Spa run. So hopefully they can figure that out and have the break to relax and get it back up to 100% so they can come back strong the second half. Alexander Albon qualified in 10th and then ended up dropping down to 12th. He did pass Tsunoda on lap 15 for 13th and passed K-Mag on lap 27 for 15th. He did start on mediums, went only 9 laps before switching to another set of mediums, and went to lap 24 to switch to that hards to go to the end on that set of hards. So that strategy, I think, could have been handled a little bit better for Alex Albon. I think they could have maybe extended a little bit longer, but that's hard to say during the race with trying to undercut or overcut some folks around them in that running. So I think he did decent. He just didn't have what he needed in this race to really quite get up there to the point range, and only ended up in 12th. I know he's looking for better since he qualified up in 10th, so he's going to probably be hurting in his regard of his drive, but I think he did a decent job overall. Lance Stroll didn't do so great in qualifying, and qualified in 15th, worked his way up to 11th, not quite to the point range where he needed to be, but kind of stayed out of trouble, kind of stayed in that background there, pitted on lap 13 from mediums to hards. I did miss where he switched again for what tire set, but he ran a fairly good race to get himself back close to the points, but Aston Martin really needs him to be consistently into the points, consistently up there, whereas teammate is to make the most out of that Aston Martin to maintain that constructor standings. So that gets us to through the bottom 10 up to the top 10. Daniel Ricciardo, I think, did a really good job. I think qualified in 13th, ended up in 10th, gaining a point for RB, which is always good to see. I know there's been all kinds of questions for Daniel, whether he's going to keep the seat at RB, get moved up to Red Bull to replace Perez, or be kicked out altogether. So there's all kinds of weird rumors running around him, and having a decent showing keeps him more in that running and beating his teammate, even though his teammate had some parts changed and started at the back of the field, is always good in this go. And getting points kind of gives that extra plus for him today. He did have quite a bit of action today, even though he lost one position on the start of the race. He did, I see him on lap 23 passing George for 16th. And then he passed K-Mag on lap 26 for 14th. Passed Gasly on lap 29 for 13th. And passed Stroll on lap 37 for 10th. So he did have quite a bit of action on track, doing most as he could to get his spots in line. So I think he did a really good run. Probably wanted to be better just to really prove himself, but gaining points for RB is always a good thing when your seat is on the line. So good job for Daniel. Esteban Ocon was another one of these I thought was kind of odd. Qualified in 9th, ended up in 9th. Had lots of action on track. Didn't have a good start. Lost 2 positions on the start of the race. Pitted on lap 13 for a set of hards, and then switched to another set of hards on lap 31. He did pass Bottas on lap 14 for 16th position. Passed Gasly on lap 15 for 15th. Passed Hulkenberg on lap 16 for 13th. Passed Alonso on lap 20 for 11th. Passed Alonso again on lap 32 for 13th. And passed Ricardo on lap 41 for 10th. So a really good run for for Esteban Ocon. Even though he ended up in the same spot he was, I think that Alpine still is struggling, still needs some updates to really get more competitive with that mid-pack group. And with some of those changes that are happening there as well, there's always interesting things that are going on in the background that can distract you. So I think it was a really good job for Esteban Ocon. Even though I know he's moving to Haas next year, and so that kind of plays out in this. So we'll have to see how that plays out the rest of the season to see how that he brings to Haas to see if they can actually move forward in that running. If he brings a lot, or if he just kind of does his normal decent runs, but not the greatest run. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye on him the back half to see if his signing has any effect on this year, or if it's just moving forward for the 2025 year. Fernando Alonso did a fairly good job, qualified in 8th, ended up in 8th. He did pass Hulkenberg on lap 16th for 12th. And that's basically the only pass that I have him down for. I'm sure he did some other passes that I missed. He did go on a set of mediums to start off with, switched to hards on lap 14, and then switched to another set of mediums, I believe, later on in the race. A good run for him in that Aston Martin. Aston Martin is kind of still struggling along, not getting the updates, and that they were really hoping for that would push them forward in this run, but still semi-competing in that back of that top pack, if just on the edge. So if they can keep up with that, that'll be good for them. And it doesn't hurt when good old wisely Fernando Alonso is doing a fairly good job and not getting frustrated in that run. So a good job for Fernando. Even though he didn't move up farther than his qualifying position, I think it was going to be kind of hard for him to do so overall with the people in front of him and the updates and upgrades that they have done. So we'll have to see if Aston Martin can really pull something together during this break to see if they can actually get that extra advantage that they need for the back half of this season. Sergio Perez didn't do so good. I think this probably means he was probably going to lose his seat over the break. If not, then probably fairly quickly afterwards in that Red Bull. Qualifying in second was really good, but then dropping down to seventh overall, even though he got the fastest lap to try to recover that extra point. I think in general, it's not enough for him, especially when his teammate was starting behind him and got all the way up to fourth position overall, and didn't look like Perez was really anywhere in the mix on this race. That could have been partly to the strategy. I know he complained about that medium stint on his tires, but who knows exactly, how that's going to play out. Seems like something's always catching Sergio Perez a little bit off or a little bit wrong. And I'm thinking just the pressure has kind of gotten to him. The people and the reporters every day asking him, hey, what's the status of your seat? I know you signed for this, but you didn't actually have some clause in there that can then release you during this season. So who knows how that's playing out in his mind. And then, of course, always being that far behind your teammate always hurts. So I think that's kind of compounding the issue here. Red Bull is not the friendliest team to drive for, it seems. But him dropping from that second position, not really playing for that win like they were hoping for, and then dropping back behind your teammate when your teammate started off, pretty much 8 positions behind you is not a good sign either. So a pretty bad run for Sergio Perez in my view. Hopefully he can, kind of relax and get his mojo back over the break to just basically drive his own race and not have to worry about everything else around him to get him back into the sync and so he can drive that car if he's still in that seat after the break. Carlos Sainz qualified in 7th, ended up in 6th. I know he was doing a decent job. I think he was trying to run that race. It wasn't quite fitting what other people were doing. Trying to do the more normal. I think he was trying to do a one stop at first, trying to go a little bit long, but then it wasn't quite where he wanted it to be on that set of hard tires. So he went back to the 2-stop race, switching to mediums and then switching back to a set of hards. He did gain a spot at the very beginning of the race, which is good to see. And passed Perez on lap 39 for that 7th position. So a decent strategy for Ferrari, even though Ferrari is still kind of struggling with those updates that they brought and need to bring some other updates to understand exactly how to push that Ferrari forward. They had a good first part of this season, kind of started dropping off in the mid-pack, so hopefully they can get their act together the second half of this season, put some more pressure on the McLarens and the Red Bulls. And potentially the Mercedes now as well. So there's going to be a good run for that front-running spot between 4 teams, so we'll have to see how that plays out in the future. Lando, I think, was struggling this race, this whole weekend for the most part. Qualified in 4th in the rain, which he's usually pretty good at, but ended up in 5th overall. Lost 3 positions on the start of the race where he went wide, hit the gravel a little bit on couple of tires that pushed him back into that pack, and he never really recovered. I know he was trying to push a little bit harder, but it's not quite where he wanted to be in that field for this car during this weekend. So I think he was really struggling in this weekend. This McLaren not quite where it was tuned to in the past. Still did a decent job, but really struggling to get the field that he wanted for this McLaren this weekend, and I think that hurt him overall. He did go to lap 15 on a set of mediums, then switched to hards, and then switched to another set of hards on lap 29. Listening to his radio, basically, he was always asking what the cars around him were doing when they were asking him his opinion. And so I think he just kind of felt unsure all weekend. He did pass Perez on lap 31 for that 6th position and was kind of maintaining that throughout this race, mainly due to the strategy that they were on. They couldn't quite get to where they wanted to. They got behind Max. and really couldn't gain on Max. He did put some pressure on Max a couple of times, but nothing that was really significant in that running. I was expecting a little bit more between them once they got close to each other, but neither of them really pushed the other in those overtakes. They seem to somehow avoid those. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the second half, as those are the two runners. Max is, of course, the number one favorite due to the point lead that he has, but there's still potential that Lando could come in and overtake him for that championship, even though it is kind of rare to have that gap overdone. So we'll have to pay attention to both of them. And speaking of Max, he did a really good job. Not quite where he wanted to be, but a really good job, I think, overall with that 10-place grid penalty for changing power unit components. Dropped them back 10 spots to that 11th after getting pole position. So that was always good to see. And he got that pole position quite a decent margin. So I was kind of expecting him to kind of roam through the field a little bit faster than he did. But he did still do a fairly good job in that Red Bull. Gained two positions at the start of the race. Passed Alonso on lap 2 for 8th. And kind of just maintained that position, doing the pit stop strategies. Pitted on lap 11 from a set of mediums to a set of hards. And went to another set of hards on lap 29. Made it all the way up to that 4th position after George Russell was disqualified, so technically it was a 5th position, but got bumped up because of George. Decent run. I think he was looking for more, but a decent run in that Red Bull overall for having a 10-place grid penalty. Charles Leclerc, who started off in first, I think was looking for a lot more than he got, but ended up in third at the end. Off the grid during the race, off the podium and during the race, but bumped up to third position after George's disqualification. He did have a good start, maintained that lead on the first several corners and just kind of was maintaining it, but just didn't have the speed in that Ferrari as the Mercedes and the McLarens were coming up on behind him. And so he's trying to play the more defensive game pretty much all race, trying to keep him in that position, trying to maximize where he was going to end up. He did start off on a set of mediums, went to lap 13, switched to hards, and then switched to another set of hards on lap 25. And I know he questioned the strategy a little bit. I think that was mainly to try to cover off more people around him during this pit stop strategy in that regard. But I think he could have gone a little bit longer on those. And so they'll have to go back and investigate if they could have done anything better in that Ferrari. But a decent job for him, even though it doesn't look like it, dropping from first to third. That Ferrari's not quite where they were looking for it at this point in time. Dropping off at this point, needing to get those updates so that they can maintain their speed to the cars around them. So a decent run for Charles Leclerc overall, in my view, besides all the rambling. Oscar Piastri did a really good job, qualified in 5th, ended up in 2nd. He did pretty awesome job overall, especially after that kind of a subdued win that he was given last week. Coming out strong, trying to prove that he can be the winner in a race as well as not just giving it to him because of the weird strategy that McLaren put them on. So he did gain a position at the start of the race. He did pass George Russell on lap 12 for 9th, passed Perez on lap 13 for 6th, passed Leclerc on lap 36 for 3rd, maintained that, put pressure on the Lewis quite for a little while, and Russell coming back around him was good to see. Did some really good jobs there. He did pit on lap 12 from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then lap 31 went to another set of hards. So a decent run, not quite up there to really put the extra pressure on Lewis that he needed to. Kind of got stuck behind Charles near the end. Put a little bit too much for him to really win the race, or potentially even come into that second position where he was on track by. But a good run for him in that McLaren. And in my view, I think he did pretty much all he could. I think there were little strategy for the McLaren was off just slightly again this weekend, so they need to go back and really reevaluate how they're doing those calls. But I think he did a really good job in that McLaren. And then, of course, Lewis Hamilton qualified in third and made it up to first. He had a really good race. He did get driver of the day, and I can understand why, because he really was able to do the normal race strategy and do it extremely well, and got him up into that second position during the actual race, and then got that first position after his teammate was disqualified. So he did pass Perez at the start of the race, getting into that second position at the very beginning, which was always good to see. And then he passed Charles Leclerc on lap 3 for the lead, maintained that lead for almost probably half the race before that was given to his teammate due to the strategy of the pits, of him going on to that one stop instead of the two stop that happened. And then going forward, eventually putting pressure back on his teammate, but not quite able to pull that first position off under racing conditions. So it was a really good race overall. Unexpected, I think, for him to be behind his teammate. They did let him race as long as it was clean, and I think he was trying to make sure that it was clean because he didn't want to cause any other issues, and that probably hurt him a little bit in that run. But a really good job from him in this race. I think he did an excellent job. He deserves driver of the day. If it wasn't for Russell, strategy, a call, and just being able to maintain that first position if they hadn't disqualified his car. Overall, really good race in that regard. So, quick summary of who was in the lead and some time gaps that I wrote down. So, at lap 5, Hamilton was in the lead by 0.8 seconds. By lap 10, it was up to 1.9. And then it went back down to 1.8 on lap 22, with still Hamilton in the lead. That was halfway point. And then at lap 34, I have George Russell being in the lead with a 5.8 second gap. And then by the end, lap 44, it was down to less than half a second for Russell on that lead between him and his teammate, Lewis Hamilton. So it was a really good race. At the end, they kind of came together. Really exciting, trying to see if it was going to be Hamilton or Russell, or if Oscar could take advantage of anything that would happen to the people in front as they were trying to battle it out. I enjoyed that aspect of it. It's kind of a sad ending in the sense that George Carr was disqualified, but that's the rules. You have to make sure you have those margins taken care of in all of your strategies. So that's one on Mercedes for kind of messing up in that regard. But what was your thoughts? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Did it come to kind of a boring race, and then except for the weirdness that was happening, and so it was just kind of an oddity? Did you find this more or less enticing than the other races that we've had so far? And since you've made it this far, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and thank you so much for making it this far. I really appreciate it. So, what did this do to all of our runnings? We basically have Max Verstappen still in the course in the lead with 277, gaining a little bit of gap on Lando Norris with 199 now. Oscar Piastri was able to jump Carlos Sainz from that fourth position, now with 167 over Carlos's 162. And I apologize here because the other one was Esteban Ocon getting a couple of points. So he jumped up above Alex Albon for that 17th position. So Alex should be in red. But overall, the other changes were kind of stagnant, gaining ground or losing ground. Of course, we still have 3 people with no points at the back of the field. And of course, we have Oliver Behrman still in 14th position overall with just having that race that he was in. So, did this do anything to the constructors? No. Constructors are still the same way they were last week. Red Bull now has 408. McLaren gaining some ground there with 366. So there's that championship that we're really keeping an eye on, because that's the one that can really affect, I think, with McLaren's strength so far of gaining points, double points in all the races recently. Could have put a lot of pressure on Red Bull, who's kind of been struggling to have both cars in the points. Ferrari's now at 345. Mercedes gaining a little bit of ground with 266, but losing that Russell position cost them quite a bit. Aston Martin now at 73, with Red Bull gaining that point, so they're at 34. So Haas needs to watch out. They still have a chance to getting that 6th position through this back half, but they need to watch out for Alpine as they gain some ground on them and still have that chance to lose that 7th position to them. And then, of course, you have Williams and Stake rounding out the bottom. So what do we have coming up? We have the summer break, of course, which is not a super long break, but it is considered a summer break for them. So after about 3 weeks, we'll come back to Netherlands for Zandvoort on August 25th for the race. We have a length of 2.646 miles. We'll be running 72 laps for a total race distance of 190.504 miles. And it was first introduced in 1952, and the lap record holder currently is Lewis Hamilton in 2021 with 1 minute 11.097 seconds. So until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.